Did Meghan Markle just hit rock bottom in front of the world? That's the question millions are asking right now as whispers turn into headlines, and headlines turn into viral moments that seem almost impossible to ignore. Imagine being in a room, thinking you're pulling the strings, planning your big move, believing the world is watching, and then realizing, suddenly, nobody cares. That's exactly what happened. Meghan Markle, once the center of royal fascination, tried to stage a moment that would undermine Kate Middleton and Prince William, a plan designed to reposition herself at the top of the royal hierarchy. And instead, total silence. The world barely noticed, and social media couldn't have been more indifferent. But why did this happen? What could possibly have gone so wrong? And why is everyone now calling her a Z-lister? But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. It's tempting to dismiss this as just another royal tabloid story, another attempt by Meghan to grab attention in a world that seems to have moved on. But the truth is deeper, messier, and far more revealing than you might expect. This isn't just about one failed stunt. It's about desperation, miscalculation, and a pattern of public blunders that has been building for years. And if you think this is just gossip, think again. Because the events we're about to uncover highlight an important truth. In the world of modern celebrity and monarchy, perception isn't everything. It's the only thing. To understand the gravity of this moment, we need to rewind a bit. Meghan Markle didn't just appear on the scene yesterday. She entered the royal landscape as a calculated combination of charm, charisma, and modern relatability. She was the actress with the captivating smile, the American girl next door with a global following, who suddenly found herself standing in the hallowed halls of one of the oldest and most scrutinized institutions on Earth. At first, there was fascination. Every appearance, every photo, every public statement was dissected, celebrated, and discussed in ways that few modern figures have ever experienced. But with attention comes scrutiny, and scrutiny can be brutal. It didn't take long before whispers turned into criticisms, and small missteps became public spectacles. The media, the public, even royal insiders, they all noticed. And Meghan's responses, carefully curated or otherwise, were increasingly seen as attempts to maintain control in a landscape she couldn't fully dominate. You see, in a world that thrives on tradition and ritual, breaking the rules, even with the best intentions, comes at a cost. And Meghan's cost? Public patience running thin. So here we are, leading up to this particular incident. Meghan, feeling sidelined and perhaps overshadowed by Kate Middleton's calm, calculated, and universally praised public image, decided to act. She had a plan. It wasn't reckless at first glance. On the contrary, it had all the hallmarks of a strategic attempt to regain attention, to remind the world that she wasn't just an accessory to the royal story. She was the story. But strategy is only effective if you understand the terrain. And Meghan misread the room, misread the public mood, and misread her own influence. What makes this story even more compelling is the contrast. On one hand, you have Kate and William, consistently projecting poise, elegance, and relatability. Their moves are subtle, almost invisible, but incredibly effective. Meanwhile, Meghan's move was overt, loud, and unintentionally self-defeating. Imagine trying to outshine the sun with a flashlight. That's what happened. The attempt, meant to draw attention and admiration, ended up creating the opposite effect: laughter, ridicule, and a sinking sense of irrelevance. And yet, there's more. Because the world didn't just ignore her. It reacted in ways that Meghan probably didn't anticipate. Social media, which once amplified her every word and gesture, now served as a mirror reflecting the futility of her actions. Memes, sarcastic comments, and pointed critiques spread like wildfire. Influencers and casual observers alike joined the chorus, highlighting the disconnect between her intention and reality. And while Meghan might have expected headlines praising her audacity or cleverness, she instead found herself mocked, questioned, and, perhaps most painfully, forgotten. But why is this so fascinating to so many people? Why does it matter that one royal figure's plan backfired? The answer lies in human psychology. We are drawn to stories of ambition and hubris. We watch closely when someone overreaches because we see fragments of our own desires, our own attempts to control situations slipping through our fingers. Meghan's story, in this sense, is a mirror. It reflects the universal tension between intent and outcome, between desire and consequence. And when you mix this with celebrity culture, royal intrigue, and a world always hungry for drama, you get a story that captivates, fascinates, and, yes, entertains, while also making you pause and wonder. What would I do in her shoes? The sequence of events leading to the public meltdown was carefully orchestrated, or at least attempted to be. There were appearances, media interactions, and strategic placements designed to grab attention. And at first, it seemed like it might work. A few articles here, some mentions on social media there. But the plan was fragile. It required precision, timing, and the undivided attention of the audience. Instead, the world had moved on. Kate and William's steady presence, coupled with ongoing global events, diluted Meghan's impact. And as the attempt faltered, frustration and desperation became visible, culminating in a moment that would be remembered not for its cleverness, but for its futility. Now, you might be thinking, this sounds harsh. Isn't Meghan entitled to her moments? Absolutely. And that's part of what makes this story layered. It's not a simple tale of villainy or failure. It's a story of human desire clashing with public perception, of ambition colliding with reality, and of the stark difference between perception management and actual influence. Meghan's scream, literal or metaphorical, is a symbol. It represents a breaking point, a moment where control slipped away and the world's apathy became painfully evident. So what exactly happened during this fateful moment? What were the actions, the reactions, the whispers behind closed doors, and the subtle ways in which her plan unraveled? That's the story we're going to unfold over the next hour. We'll explore not just the public spectacle, but the private miscalculations, the hidden messages, and the emotional turmoil that made this story impossible to ignore. You'll see how one desperate attempt spiraled into a chain reaction that left Meghan marginalized in the conversation she had hoped to dominate. And here's the kicker. While the world may seem indifferent, insiders were watching. Advisors, friends, and former allies witnessed the unraveling in real time, and their reactions add another layer to the story. Some were shocked, some were disappointed, and some couldn't help but anticipate what might come next. Because if there's one thing that's clear, it's this. In the world of high-profile public life, one misstep doesn't just fade. It ripples, creating waves that are felt long after the initial moment. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. A revelation, a twist, and an unexpected consequence that would solidify the narrative. Meghan's attempt to undermine Kate and William didn't just fail. It spectacularly backfired, leaving her isolated, frustrated, and, for many, irrelevant. And the world? The world moved on, leaving Meghan screaming into a void. Did Meghan Markle really think she could outshine Kate Middleton with this latest move? From the moment the plan was conceived, it carried all the hallmarks of desperation disguised as strategy. Imagine sitting in a room, plotting how to reclaim the spotlight, convinced that your rivals are just steps behind you, but then realizing your entire audience is somewhere else entirely. That's exactly the position Meghan found herself in. Her latest maneuver wasn't small. It wasn't subtle. It was bold, brash, and carefully calculated to attract attention. But the miscalculation lay in the one thing she couldn't control, the world's response. The story begins with timing. Timing in public perception is everything. Meghan had watched Kate's every move, analyzed the Cambridge's appearances, speeches, and social media engagement. She saw an opening. An event, an interview, or perhaps a media leak that could be leveraged to position herself as the more relevant, influential royal figure. The plan involved multiple layers, a public appearance, a calculated statement, and the subtle planting of ideas through media channels. It sounds like something out of a political playbook, not a royal scandal, but Meghan has always blended Hollywood savvy with royal aspiration. At first glance, it seemed perfect. She had allies. She had press coverage lined up. She had a narrative ready, the Meghan rising above Kate storyline. But as anyone who studies human behavior knows, even the best-laid plans can collapse if the audience doesn't buy in. And the public, unpredictable, fickle, and brutally honest, was about to make its opinion known. What's fascinating here is the psychology at play. Meghan's strategy relied on a combination of jealousy, spectacle, and subtle messaging. She understood that Kate Middleton's public image is calm, controlled, and deeply respected, but she misread how audiences interpret attempts to manipulate attention. A subtle compliment or an understated achievement from Meghan could have earned her goodwill, but an overt maneuver to outshine her sister-in-law? That's a gamble. And when the gamble fails, the fallout is both public and private. The first visible sign of the plan in motion came at a highly publicized event. Meghan arrived dressed not just to impress, but to dominate visually, a calculated choice intended to draw cameras, paparazzi, and social media discussion. But the audience response was not what she expected. Instead of admiration or intrigue, she encountered quiet dismissal, fleeting glances, and a social media reaction that ranged from polite indifference to subtle ridicule. The moment, designed to make headlines, barely registered outside of a few niche tabloids and royal gossip sites. And that's when the panic began to seep in. You see, for someone like Meghan, who has been conditioned to constant attention and validation, the lack of response feels like an immediate failure. Hollywood taught her that image is everything. And in the royal context, public perception is a form of currency more valuable than money itself. Her team reportedly scrambled behind the scenes, adjusting statements, recalibrating media angles, and attempting to generate conversation. But the core issue was more fundamental. The audience had already moved on. This wasn't the first time Meghan's strategy backfired. Previous attempts to claim relevance outside of the royal framework, from high-profile interviews to publicized media appearances, had occasionally drawn temporary attention. But those were moments carefully packaged and sensationalized by media outlets eager for drama. This time, the audience wasn't primed to react. Kate and William's steady presence overshadowed the move. The world had begun to see Meghan not as a dominant player in royal affairs, but as someone trying to force her way into a narrative that no longer belonged to her. And yet, Meghan persisted. Desperation often masquerades as confidence, and public figures are experts at projecting control even when the ground is slipping beneath them. Behind the scenes, advisors reportedly suggested restraint, but Meghan felt that hesitation would mean losing ground permanently. So she doubled down, more statements, more appearances, and an increased effort to shape the story according to her vision. But every layer added made the plan more visible, more vulnerable, and ultimately, more prone to misinterpretation. Here's where it gets particularly interesting. The maneuver wasn't just about outshining Kate. It was about perception management on a global scale. Meghan wanted to position herself as not just relevant, but indispensable. She wanted audiences to perceive a shift in influence, that the royal spotlight was hers to command, and that Kate, calm and understated, was secondary. On paper, it sounds audacious. In practice, it was misaligned with the public mood. Why? Because audiences had begun to crave authenticity over spectacle. They were no longer swayed by dramatic gestures or overt attempts to dominate. They were following Kate and William not for theatrics, but for reliability, relatability, and consistency. Meghan's maneuvers, designed to create awe, instead felt forced and artificial. Social media engagement reflected this subtly at first, then more visibly as memes, sarcastic commentary, and pointed critiques circulated. Observers could see the discrepancy. The attempt to project dominance versus the reality of public perception. But here's the real twist. It wasn't just indifference that caused the plan to fail. It was the active redirection of attention. In moments where Meghan expected headlines about her brilliance or her daring, she found herself competing with events, speeches, and appearances by the Cambridges that captured hearts and minds effortlessly. A speech from William on a global cause, a charitable initiative highlighted by Kate, or even casual public appearances that radiated calm professionalism. It all undermined Meghan's carefully orchestrated narrative. The more she tried to reclaim attention, the more the spotlight seemed to slide from her grasp. At this point, panic began to manifest more visibly. Insiders report that advisors noticed stress in Meghan's demeanor, subtle yet telling signs that her confidence was cracking. Decisions became more reactive than proactive. Media appearances grew riskier. Statements intended to position her favorably sometimes backfired, generating the opposite effect. It's a classic pattern when ambition and desperation collide. The harder you push, the more the world resists. And let's not forget the role of the media itself. Tabloids, influencers, and gossip accounts were quick to pick up on the discrepancy between Meghan's intention and the public's response. Headlines highlighted the mismatch between her plan and reality. Meghan's attempt to eclipse Kate falls flat. Royal drama? Not this time. Public indifferent to Markle maneuver. Every article, every tweet, every viral post served as a magnifying mirror reflecting her failure. But here's the most striking detail. The failure wasn't just public. Private reactions from insiders, friends, and advisors reportedly added another layer of humiliation. Some were stunned by the audacity of the attempt. Others were disappointed by the misreading of the landscape. And a few could barely contain their incredulity that someone so media-savvy could miscalculate so completely. Meghan's maneuver, which she had imagined as a strategic masterstroke, was, in reality, unraveling on multiple fronts simultaneously. Yet despite these setbacks, Meghan's reaction was predictably human. When you've built your identity on influence, attention, and control, the sensation of irrelevance can be disorienting. Sources describe moments of visible frustration, whispered arguments with staff, and the quiet exasperation of someone who had prepared for adoration and instead received indifference. It's a dramatic emotional beat, one that underscores a deeper narrative. Attempts to manipulate perception are fragile, particularly when the audience sees through them. So what does this all mean? Why does this matter? Because it's more than a royal anecdote or celebrity gossip. This is a story of ambition colliding with reality, of human desire for recognition clashing with the truth of public perception, of the stark difference between planning for attention and actually receiving it. Meghan's latest public maneuver is a case study in overreach, a narrative that illustrates how carefully orchestrated strategies can collapse when the human element, the audience, doesn't cooperate. And just when it seemed like the story couldn't get any more dramatic, the next sequence of events would take the situation to a new level: the public meltdown. The moment where desperation turned into spectacle, where private frustration became publicly visible, and where the world finally saw not just the failed plan, but the emotional consequences of that failure. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. A reaction so vivid, so telling, that it would leave observers questioning everything they thought they knew about Meghan, her strategy, and her position in the royal hierarchy. Have you ever watched a storm unfold and realized you were witnessing chaos in slow motion? That's exactly what happened when Meghan Markle's latest attempt to outshine Kate Middleton and Prince William collided with the media machine. From the moment her plan leaked into public view, journalists, commentators, influencers, and social media users jumped in with a frenzy that no one could have fully controlled. And yet, despite the whirlwind of coverage, the irony was staggering. Meghan had orchestrated this attention, but the narrative spun wildly beyond her control. The media circus began with the first hint of her plan appearing in a few discrete outlets. A minor article here, a brief mention there. Enough to spark curiosity, but not enough to dominate the conversation. Meghan's team, confident in their ability to control the flow, assumed this would gradually build into full-scale coverage, with headlines praising her audacity, her cleverness, and her charisma. But in reality, the public's attention was already divided. Global news, ongoing royal duties, and the perennial fascination with Kate's calm composure diluted the impact of Meghan's actions before it could even take hold. What's fascinating here is how quickly narrative framing can make or break public perception. Journalists saw the overt attempt, the carefully orchestrated appearances, and the high-profile statements, and they smelled a story. But instead of framing Meghan as a strategic genius, the media's tone leaned toward irony and critique. Headlines that might have celebrated her ambition instead questioned her judgment. Markle's bid to overshadow Kate falls flat. Desperate or daring? Meghan misfires again. Royal drama? Not today. Each headline chipped away at the image Meghan had tried to project. Social media, of course, amplified everything. Platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok exploded with commentary, memes, and snarky reactions. Within hours, dozens of viral posts had emerged, contrasting Meghan's dramatic gestures with Kate's understated elegance. The public, which Meghan had hoped to impress, responded with humor, ridicule, and, most importantly, indifference. In some cases, the posts weren't just mocking. They were analytical, dissecting her actions and comparing them to previous missteps. The narrative began to shift from admiration to critique. What made the media circus even more dramatic was the tension between traditional outlets and online platforms. Newspapers and TV channels, long accustomed to controlling royal narratives, competed with real-time commentary from influencers and social media users. Meghan's plan, meant to generate controlled coverage, instead became a free-for-all. Every move, every expression, every statement was scrutinized, dissected, and reinterpreted in ways she likely hadn't anticipated. One of the most striking aspects of this media storm was the speed with which it escalated. A single misinterpreted glance, a slightly awkward phrase, or a poorly timed appearance became fodder for viral discussion. Some journalists framed it as a deliberate attempt at drama. Others hinted at desperation. The public seemed to pick up on these nuances, and suddenly, the narrative was no longer about ambition. It was about a miscalculated effort to claim relevance. Humor and irony played major roles in this coverage. Memes juxtaposing Meghan's gestures with Kate's poise flooded social media feeds. Commentary highlighted the contrast between Meghan's overt attempts and the Cambridge's understated dominance. Even celebrity commentators, people whose careers are built on observation, spectacle, and wit, joined in, adding layers of mockery and analysis. The more Meghan tried to capture attention, the more the media reframed it as a failure. The irony was thick. She had sought the spotlight and ended up the punchline. And yet, the drama wasn't only external. Reports from insiders suggest that Meghan's own team struggled to manage the unfolding chaos. Advisors who had previously been praised for navigating media relations were suddenly scrambling to contain narratives that had spiraled far beyond their control. Calls, emails, and strategic meetings occurred behind closed doors, but even these efforts couldn't counteract the overwhelming wave of public commentary. The media circus had a life of its own, and Meghan was watching from the center of it, powerless to direct its energy. One particularly revealing example involved a high-profile social media post that had been intended to subtly reposition Meghan in the public eye. Instead, the post was dissected, ridiculed, and in some cases, mocked for its tone and content. Influencers analyzed the body language, tone, and choice of words, generating thousands of reactions within hours. News outlets picked up these reactions, and the loop fed itself. Attention, but not the kind Meghan wanted. The lesson here is stark. Controlling perception is impossible once the narrative has escaped your hands. Public reaction wasn't the only factor amplifying the media circus. Kate Middleton and Prince William, though largely silent, became unintentional participants. Their steady public appearances, dignified statements, and charitable engagement created a backdrop against which Meghan's moves appeared theatrical, even desperate. The contrast was impossible to ignore. The media latched onto it, framing Meghan's actions in relation to the Cambridge's composure. Every comparison subtly reinforced the idea that Meghan's plan, rather than elevating her, had emphasized her own volatility. Ironically, the coverage that might have helped her, positive profiles, sympathetic articles, and PR-managed appearances, was overshadowed by commentary on her missteps. Meghan's attempt to dominate the narrative backfired because the narrative had already shifted. She became the subject of analysis rather than admiration. Media outlets, influencers, and the general public were now interpreting, critiquing, and dissecting her actions rather than celebrating them. The intended effect had completely reversed. At the height of this media storm, Meghan reportedly attempted to recalibrate. Interviews were rescheduled, statements rewritten, and appearances replanned. But by this point, the momentum was lost. The media machine had moved on to covering responses, reactions, and the growing chorus of commentary mocking or questioning her approach. Attempts to control coverage now felt reactive rather than proactive, signaling to observers that the initial strategy had failed. The circus also revealed something deeper: the public's evolving relationship with Meghan. For a time, She had been captivating, intriguing, even inspirational to many. But as attempts at spectacle mounted, audiences began to perceive her actions differently. Ambition became desperation. Clever strategy became manipulation. Media coverage didn't just report events, it shaped perception, turning Meghan from a central figure into a case study in miscalculation. What makes this chapter of the story so compelling is the interplay between intention and outcome. Meghan aimed for dominance and admiration. She received scrutiny and critique. She sought attention. She got analysis. She wanted relevance. She faced indifference. This gap between expectation and reality fueled emotional responses, both privately for Meghan and publicly among audiences. It's a stark reminder that in the modern media landscape, perception is fragile, narrative control is tenuous, and one misstep can reverberate across platforms, continents, and cultures. And just when it seemed like the media circus had reached its peak, the real climax was approaching. A private meltdown, a visible emotional response, and a series of moments that would make headlines for months. Meghan's actions had created a spectacle, but the audience was now waiting for the fallout, for the crack in the carefully crafted image, for the scream that would reveal the human behind the headlines. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. A revelation so vivid and a response so public that it would solidify the narrative. Meghan's plan didn't just fail. It spectacularly backfired in front of the world, leaving her scrambling, frustrated, and completely exposed. While Meghan Markle's latest maneuver exploded into a media frenzy, Kate Middleton and Prince William remained calm, poised, and largely unshaken. This contrast was stark, almost cinematic. On one side, a public figure struggling to reclaim relevance, desperately orchestrating moments to draw attention. On the other, two royals embodying quiet influence, steadily commanding respect without ever needing to scream, stage, or manipulate. And this chapter isn't just about observation. It's about understanding the subtle mechanics of public perception, power, and strategy that Kate and William have mastered. Kate and William have always excelled at what might be called silent power. It's a form of influence built on consistency, visibility, and authenticity. Unlike Meghan, whose actions often demand attention, Kate and William cultivate authority through routine and subtlety. Every public appearance, charitable engagement, and interaction with the media is carefully orchestrated, not to dominate the spotlight, but to reinforce their credibility and relatability. While Meghan's every move screams, "Look at me," Kate's presence whispers, "Trust me, I'm competent, grounded, and dependable." This chapter begins with a striking observation. The more Meghan pushed for spectacle, the more the Cambridge's understated strategy highlighted her missteps. While Meghan arranged high-profile appearances, Kate simply attended engagements with her usual elegance. She smiled, listened, and engaged with the public in ways that seemed effortless but were deeply intentional. Her body language, tone, and even timing conveyed confidence without needing to force it. Meanwhile, William maintained a calm, measured demeanor, demonstrating leadership and stability, qualities that resonate deeply with the public. And the public notices these differences. Social media analysts observed subtle spikes in engagement whenever Kate and William appeared together. Unlike Meghan, whose appearances often generated polarized reactions, the Cambridge's visibility drew admiration, approval, and positive commentary. Their silent approach isn't accidental. It's the result of years of experience, strategic guidance, and understanding the dynamics of modern media and public attention. In essence, while Meghan shouted to be seen, Kate and William simply existed, and the world responded. One particularly revealing example involved a recent engagement at a charitable event. Meghan had made waves earlier in the week with a carefully staged appearance intended to outshine Kate. Yet, when Kate and William arrived at the same venue days later, they commanded the room with effortless poise. Photographs captured Kate's natural interactions with children and staff, her composed posture, and her approachable warmth. Social media, eager for comparison, immediately highlighted the contrast. Meghan's dramatics versus Kate's understated mastery. And in that moment, the lesson was clear: silent, consistent power often outweighs calculated spectacle. It's important to understand why this works. Human perception gravitates toward authenticity and consistency. Kate and William embody both. Audiences are drawn to leaders who are steady, reliable, and relatable, especially in contrast to figures whose actions seem performative or overcalculated. Meghan's recent attempts, by contrast, read as contrived, a stark attempt to insert herself into a narrative that the public already viewed through the lens of Kate and William's credibility. And that discrepancy fueled not just media critique, but public indifference. Psychologists and media experts note that contrast is a powerful tool in shaping public opinion. In this case, Meghan's desperation served as an unintentional amplifier for Kate and William's silent dominance. Each time Meghan attempted a high-profile intervention, it highlighted Kate's calm efficiency. The more Meghan pushed, the more obvious it became that the Cambridges required no such theatrics to command influence. This dynamic is critical to understanding the unfolding royal drama. The perceived imbalance wasn't merely about attention, it was about perceived legitimacy. The contrast also extended to social media. While Meghan's posts, appearances, and statements generated chatter, they often sparked mixed reactions. Positive engagement was sporadic. Critique, sarcasm, and even indifference were more common. Meanwhile, Kate and William's engagements consistently drew admiration and heartfelt responses. Influencers, commentators, and casual observers noted the difference. Memes comparing Meghan's over-the-top gestures with Kate's effortless composure proliferated. Hashtags and commentary reinforced the narrative. Meghan struggled for relevance, while Kate remained undeniably central in the public eye. But there's more to their power than optics. Kate and William have built credibility over years, steadily earning trust not just as royals, but as leaders, philanthropists, and relatable figures. Meghan, despite her initial fame and charm, faced the challenge of establishing similar authority in a domain that rewards consistency over spectacle. Her public maneuvers, ambitious though they were, couldn't replace years of carefully cultivated reputation. And in the ruthless court of public opinion, reputation matters more than a single headline or viral moment. It's also worth noting the psychological impact on Meghan. Observers describe how she increasingly internalized the public's indifference and the media's framing. Attempts to overshadow the Cambridges weren't met with awe. They were met with scrutiny and comparison. And comparisons, when made against two figures whose influence is subtle but deeply rooted, magnify perceived failures. Each failed attempt chipped away at confidence, creating a feedback loop. Desperation leads to more visible attempts, which leads to more scrutiny, which in turn fuels further desperation. Yet the Cambridges remained unaffected. They did not respond to the drama directly. They did not engage in public disputes or counterstatements. Their strategy relied on indirect influence, demonstrating competence, relatability, and stability while allowing Meghan's actions to speak for themselves in a less flattering light. In other words, their silence became a tool, a shield, and a subtle amplifier of their own power. The more Meghan tried to dominate, the more their quiet authority shone. This chapter also underscores an essential lesson about modern celebrity and media dynamics. Influence is not simply about visibility. It's about perception, credibility, and timing. Meghan's efforts to reclaim attention illustrate the dangers of over-reliance on spectacle in a world that increasingly values authenticity. Meanwhile, Kate and William's consistent, measured approach demonstrates how silent power, rooted in credibility and calm, can withstand and even benefit from another's overreach. But the unfolding drama wasn't just theoretical. Private observers, royal insiders, and even Meghan's team could see the shift happening in real time. Advisors reportedly warned of diminishing returns, noting that every additional effort to outshine Kate only reinforced the public's perception that Meghan's strategies were misaligned with reality. It was a slow, inexorable process, one that highlighted not only the effectiveness of Kate and William's approach, but also the fragility of attempts to manipulate perception without an established foundation of trust and admiration. And as Meghan's attempts faltered, the stage was set for what would soon become a highly visible emotional response. A moment where the strain of public scrutiny, the frustration of miscalculation, and the contrast with the Cambridge's calm authority would culminate in something dramatic, unforgettable, and painfully revealing. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. A public confrontation with perception itself, a moment that would expose vulnerability, desperation, and a stark reality check. The world was about to witness Meghan not just failing to dominate, but unraveling in full view, leaving observers both shocked and fascinated. Every ambitious plan carries a risk. Every calculated move has the potential to misfire. And in Meghan Markle's case, the backfire began quietly, almost imperceptibly, before snowballing into a spectacle that would dominate public attention. What started as a strategic attempt to undermine Kate Middleton and Prince William gradually transformed into a series of missteps that revealed a truth Meghan had tried to hide. Control over perception is fragile, and when it slips, the consequences can be brutal. The first signs of trouble emerged immediately after her carefully orchestrated appearances. Meghan had planned each element meticulously: her outfit, timing, tone, even the subtle placement of her aids, to create an image of confidence and authority. Yet, as observers quickly noted, the execution didn't match the intention. Photographers captured moments that appeared awkward or forced. Media outlets highlighted these moments with ironic captions, framing her efforts as overreaching rather than impressive. Social media, already a fickle barometer of public opinion, amplified every perceived flaw, turning minor imperfections into major talking points. What's fascinating is how perception shifted almost instantly. While Meghan likely expected admiration or curiosity, she received indifference and critique instead. An intended statement of dominance became a talking point for ridicule. A gesture meant to convey control was interpreted as desperation. Even subtle expressions, body language, and eye contact, details that might have gone unnoticed in another context, were magnified under the scrutiny of the media and public alike. And with each misinterpreted moment, the backfire grew stronger. The irony deepened when social media trends began to reflect the very opposite of Meghan's intentions. Influencers, commentators, and casual observers alike started highlighting contrasts between Meghan's flamboyance and Kate's composure. Memes circulated rapidly, comparing Meghan's stage gestures with Kate's effortless elegance. Headlines appeared questioning the logic of her strategy. Markle's latest attempt to overshadow Kate falls flat. Desperate or daring? Meghan miscalculates again. Royal spectacle? Not this time. Every new post, tweet, and story reinforced the narrative that Meghan's plan was backfiring. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Meghan reportedly became aware of the disconnect. Sources suggest her advisors attempted damage control, rewriting statements, adjusting appearances, and recalibrating media angles. But the public's reaction was already set in motion. In trying to reclaim control, Meghan's team only added layers of visibility to her faltering strategy. Each reactive measure inadvertently confirmed what the media and public were beginning to conclude: the plan had failed. One of the most striking elements of this backfire was how Meghan's intention to dominate the narrative inadvertently highlighted Kate and William's steady influence. Every attempt at spectacle cast a shadow on her own image while reinforcing the Cambridge's reliability and poise. The public, consciously or not, began drawing comparisons. Meghan's loud gestures versus Kate's quiet authority, frantic attempts versus calm execution, desperation versus composure. The contrast wasn't subtle, it was striking, and it amplified the narrative that Meghan's influence was waning. Adding to the complexity was the role of insiders and royal commentators. Experts who had once praised Meghan's media savvy began publicly critiquing her approach. Statements about misreading the room and overplaying one's hand appeared in both commentary pieces and social media threads. Analysts dissected her movements, phrasing, and interactions, highlighting misalignments between intention and execution. For a moment, Meghan's carefully curated image seemed almost irrelevant compared to the emerging story of miscalculation and public indifference. The psychological impact on Meghan during this period cannot be overstated. Observers describe growing frustration, tension, and even moments of visible irritation. Every failed attempt to regain control, every moment of public apathy, and every critical headline added weight to a situation already teetering on the edge. The more she tried to assert dominance, the more the narrative spun out of her control, creating a feedback loop. Desperation fueled more attention-seeking behavior, which in turn fueled further public critique. The backfire reached another layer when minor incidents began being interpreted as symbolic failures. A mistimed appearance, a fleeting awkward glance at an event, or an unguarded comment during an interview became evidence of a larger narrative. Meghan's desperation was now visible, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. While she had hoped to craft a story of clever ambition, the reality being documented was one of misjudgment, overreach, and unintended self-sabotage. Irony played a particularly cruel role. Meghan had once mastered media manipulation to generate fascination and engagement. But this time, her own tools turned against her. Social media trends, viral images, and news commentary magnified flaws she hadn't anticipated would matter. Efforts to dominate the conversation were overshadowed by unintended humor and pointed critiques. Every intended statement of relevance became, in perception, evidence of irrelevance. And yet, Meghan didn't stop. Perhaps desperation or pride drove her to push further. The human tendency to double down when stakes feel high is well documented, and Meghan's situation exemplified this perfectly. New appearances, media statements, and public gestures were all intended to reverse the narrative. But each attempt, instead of regaining control, only added fuel to the backfire. The very visibility she sought to command highlighted her vulnerability. The culmination of this stage came during a particularly high-profile appearance. Meghan's efforts to assert her influence were met with muted responses from attendees, polite but detached media coverage, and viral social media posts that subtly mocked her approach. The contrast with Kate's simultaneous or recent appearances could not have been starker. One royal exuding calm confidence, the other straining for attention that the public seemed unwilling to grant. The lesson became painfully clear. Control over perception is fragile, and attempts to force admiration often backfire when they lack authenticity. And then came the public and private consequences. Insiders noted visible tension among Meghan's team, with advisors struggling to reconcile her intentions with the public reality. Media outlets continued to critique her approach, amplifying missteps and reinforcing the narrative of backfire. Social media engagement reflected both mockery and indifference. Public perception had shifted. Meghan's plan, once designed to elevate her, had become evidence of miscalculation and desperation. But the most dramatic twist was yet to come. The backfire was only the prelude to a moment that would expose vulnerability, frustration, and emotion in ways the public had rarely seen. A public confrontation with reality, a moment where desperation, misjudgment, and ambition collided, was about to unfold. This next phase would not just confirm the failure of Meghan's plan. It would make it painfully visible to the world, leaving observers shocked, fascinated, and unable to look away. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. A spectacle that would not only cement the narrative of failure, but also reveal the emotional consequences of overreaching in full view of the world. Desperation has a way of revealing more than ambition ever could. When Meghan Markle realized her calculated attempts to overshadow Kate Middleton and Prince William were failing, the stakes suddenly felt higher. What had begun as a strategic move to reclaim relevance turned into a scramble to regain control. A scramble marked by increasingly risky and visible actions. Desperation, as observers would later note, has its own signature: impulsive decisions, overcompensation, and moments that reveal vulnerability even behind a carefully curated public image. The first signs of Meghan's desperation emerged subtly, almost imperceptibly, during private discussions with her advisors. Sources suggest heated debates behind closed doors, where every proposed strategy carried the implicit acknowledgement that previous efforts had flopped. Advisors, who had previously praised meticulous planning, reportedly struggled to reconcile their clients' high expectations with a public that no longer reacted as predicted. A sense of urgency replaced calm strategy, and every decision now carried the tension of make it count, or risk fading further. This is where human psychology plays a critical role. Desperation drives behavior in ways that rational calculation rarely predicts. When one's sense of influence is threatened, instinct takes over. The more control slips away, the harder one pushes to reclaim it. Meghan's team reportedly noticed this pattern emerging. Overly aggressive media pitches, attempts to stage highly visible appearances, and gestures that seemed exaggerated in an effort to demand attention. What might have worked in moments of novelty now read as forced and overly theatrical. One particularly telling instance occurred at a highly publicized event meant to showcase her relevance and charm. Meghan had planned every detail meticulously: timing, attire, engagement with media, and even the seating arrangement. Yet the reaction was far from what she anticipated. Public observers noticed tension in her gestures, a subtle strain in her facial expressions, and an overcompensation in her interactions. Rather than inspiring admiration, the event became a subtle display of desperation, magnified by media commentary and social media reactions that contrasted her overt efforts with Kate's understated elegance. And the pattern continued. With each high-profile appearance, Meghan's team attempted to amplify her visibility. Media interviews, photo opportunities, and carefully orchestrated messaging designed to control the narrative. Yet each new attempt carried risk. The audience, already conditioned to interpret her actions with skepticism, increasingly viewed these moves as overreach. Desperation, by its nature, can be seen even when concealed, and Meghan's public gestures began to signal urgency rather than authority. Social media again played a pivotal role. Hashtags, trending topics, and viral posts amplified both critique and mockery. Every overcalculated smile or gesture was dissected in real time. Comparisons between Meghan and Kate were unavoidable. Commentators, influencers, and even casual viewers participated in a relentless feedback loop. Meghan's attempts at visibility, intended to dominate attention, highlighted instead a growing sense of misalignment between her ambition and the public's reception. Adding to the complexity was Meghan's own awareness of the shifting narrative. Observers suggest that moments of frustration and visible agitation became more frequent. Staff members reported subtle signs of tension during appearances, hand gestures, posture, and body language that betrayed a level of anxiety inconsistent with her intended image of calm control. Desperation, it seems, does not hide easily, and the world began to notice the cracks. The irony is striking. Meghan's attempts to regain dominance not only failed, but also reinforced the very contrasts that weakened her public perception. Kate Middleton's calm authority and William's steady presence became more pronounced in comparison, amplifying Meghan's visible struggle. Each desperate gesture, intended to reclaim influence, inadvertently highlighted her vulnerability. The public perception shifted from intrigue to scrutiny. The narrative wasn't about ambition, it was about overreach. Psychologists analyzing public figures note that desperation manifests in patterns that audiences can intuitively detect. It's not merely the actions themselves, but the subtle energy behind them, the tension, urgency, and overcompensation. Meghan's back-to-back high-profile engagements, media interactions, and public statements reflected these patterns, unintentionally confirming to the public that she was struggling to maintain relevance. The audience, whether consciously or not, picked up on the emotional undertone, interpreting ambition as volatility and confidence as fragility. Meanwhile, insiders report that Meghan's internal circle was also affected. Advisors who had once championed her media savvy now found themselves in reactive positions, trying to contain and redirect narratives that had already spiraled beyond their control. The pressure to fix the public image intensified, fueling further desperate measures. Every plan was now accompanied by a growing recognition that failure carried immediate, visible consequences. Yet Meghan persisted. Determination, pride, and a desire to regain control fueled increasingly bold actions. Attempts to engage with media outlets, public appearances designed to overshadow Kate, and statements aimed at asserting influence were executed with an intensity that reflected urgency more than strategy. Each gesture, while meticulously planned, increasingly read as an attempt to reclaim ground already lost. And the public noticed. Engagement metrics, social media commentary, and news coverage reflected the disconnect between intention and perception. Efforts that might once have generated admiration were now interpreted as theatrical, exaggerated, or desperate. Every move magnified contrasts. Meghan's visible struggle versus Kate's quiet confidence. Meghan's urgency versus William's composure. The backfire, it seemed, had entered a new, more intense stage, one in which desperation itself became a defining element of the public narrative. This chapter also highlights a critical aspect of high-profile public life. Visibility is a double-edged sword. The more prominent a figure becomes, the more closely actions are scrutinized. Desperation, even if intended to reclaim attention, can amplify vulnerability, creating a feedback loop that is both psychologically and publicly punishing. Meghan's trajectory in this period illustrates that phenomenon vividly. The harder she pushed, the more apparent her struggle became, and the more the public narrative turned against her. And just when it seemed that the stage could not get any more tense, the next moment would push the story into full-blown spectacle. A dramatic incident, widely reported and shared, would expose vulnerability, amplify scrutiny, and cement the narrative of desperation. Meghan's attempts to regain control were not just faltering. They were about to culminate in a highly visible, unforgettable reaction that would leave the public riveted and critics relentless. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. A public display so revealing, so dramatic, that it would leave the world talking for weeks, and cement the idea that Meghan's ambition had collided headfirst with reality, in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. Have you ever seen someone unravel right in front of the world and felt the tension of it seep through the screen? That's exactly what happened when Meghan Markle's desperate attempts to outshine Kate Middleton and Prince William reached a breaking point. What had started as a calculated plan had now escalated into a full-blown public meltdown, a moment where ambition, frustration, and vulnerability collided in ways that were impossible to ignore. The meltdown didn't happen overnight. It was the result of a gradual buildup of missteps, failed strategies, and mounting pressure from both media scrutiny and public perception. Sources described the days leading up to the incident as increasingly tense, advisors scrambling to contain the narrative, social media commentary growing ever more critical, and Meghan herself reportedly exhibiting visible signs of frustration and agitation. Every failed attempt to regain relevance added weight to the next, creating a feedback loop that was as psychologically taxing as it was public. The first visible signs came during a high-profile appearance meant to showcase confidence and influence. Meghan arrived with all the polish and poise she could muster, expecting the cameras to capture admiration, the media to narrate authority, and the public to respond with intrigue. Instead, what unfolded was far different. Observers noted tension in her posture, sharp gestures that seemed forced, and subtle expressions of irritation, details that were amplified by the media and quickly went viral on social platforms. It wasn't the image of a poised, commanding royal. It was someone teetering on the edge of control. Social media immediately reacted. Memes, hashtags, and commentary dissected every movement, expression, and interaction. Comparisons with Kate Middleton's calm demeanor were relentless. Whereas Meghan's gestures screamed urgency and intensity, Kate's subtle body language and measured engagement radiated composure. Audiences quickly interpreted the difference as a sign of vulnerability on Meghan's part. Every effort to dominate attention only amplified the public perception of a meltdown in progress. The irony of the situation was thick. Meghan, who had once mastered public attention through strategic media engagement, now found herself at the mercy of that very attention. The tools she had previously wielded to shape narratives were now highlighting every misstep. Every gesture, word, and appearance was magnified, dissected, and framed in ways she could not control. The narrative had shifted completely, from strategic ambition to visible unraveling. Insiders report that Meghan's emotional state during this period was strained. Frustration reportedly manifested in sharp exchanges with staff, intense focus on public perception, and a constant recalibration of strategy. Attempts to regain control, through interviews, media statements, and staged appearances, were increasingly reactive, reflecting urgency more than deliberation. The public could sense it, even if subconsciously. Desperation had replaced confidence, and tension had replaced composure. Meanwhile, the media circus was relentless. Analysts, commentators, and influencers dissected her every move. Some framed it as a strategic failure, others as a psychological breakdown, and still others highlighted the stark contrast with Kate and William's unshakable calm. Coverage wasn't just about reporting events. It was about interpreting meaning, shaping perception, and amplifying the narrative that Meghan's plan had spectacularly misfired. What made this meltdown particularly compelling was its visibility. Unlike private struggles or behind-the-scenes stress, the public meltdown was exposed to millions of viewers, readers, and social media users. Every photograph, every clip, every moment captured became evidence for the emerging narrative. Meghan's efforts to reclaim dominance had collapsed under the weight of reality. And yet, in true dramatic fashion, the situation escalated further. Reports from insiders suggest that after the appearance, Meghan engaged in private discussions that reflected growing frustration and a sense of urgency. Advisors struggled to redirect the narrative. Social media trends continued to highlight her missteps, and the public conversation moved toward speculation about her emotional state. The meltdown was no longer just a series of failed gestures. It had become a story in itself, one that captivated audiences precisely because of its intensity and visibility. It's worth noting the psychological mechanics at play. Desperation, when visible, triggers fascination, judgment, and empathy in equal measure. Observers can't help but watch, analyze, and form opinions. Meghan's meltdown was a perfect storm, a high-profile figure, a public audience, a relentless media cycle, and a stark contrast with the calm authority of the Cambridges. The emotional spike in the narrative created what experts call compelling drama. Viewers couldn't look away. The public meltdown also revealed deeper truths about power, perception, and influence. Meghan's attempts to manipulate attention had been precise and calculated, but when control slipped, the consequences were magnified. In contrast, Kate and William's consistent, measured presence underscored the fragility of Meghan's strategy. Their silent power, built on reliability and authenticity, made Meghan's desperation more visible, more dramatic, and more publicly scrutinized. By the end of the day, the meltdown had reached a tipping point. Media coverage framed it as a critical moment in Meghan's public narrative. Social media engagement exploded, and the conversation about her struggle dominated trending topics. What had begun as a calculated maneuver to reclaim attention had become evidence of overreach, miscalculation, and vulnerability. The backfire was now complete, fully visible, and irreversible in its impact on public perception. But the story didn't end with observation alone. The meltdown set the stage for the next, even more dramatic chapter. The personal and emotional consequences that would ripple through Meghan's inner circle, challenge her advisors, and create moments of tension and revelation that no one outside the palace walls could have anticipated. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. A sequence of events that would not only expose vulnerabilities but also trigger reactions, alliances, and decisions that would reshape the public narrative entirely, leaving audiences stunned, captivated, and desperate to see what happened next. Every high-stakes drama has its backstage, the rooms where strategy, stress, and panic collide. For Meghan Markle, the public meltdown was only the visible tip of a much larger iceberg. Behind closed doors, her team of advisors faced unprecedented pressure. They had spent months orchestrating appearances, managing media narratives, and controlling public perception. But as Meghan's attempts to overshadow Kate Middleton and Prince William backfired spectacularly, the advisors found themselves in crisis, scrambling to contain fallout, salvage credibility, and navigate a rapidly shifting narrative that no amount of planning could tame. The first signs of crisis emerged almost immediately after the public meltdown. Sources describe tense meetings where every word was scrutinized, every decision weighed against the reality of media scrutiny. Advisors who had previously operated with confidence were suddenly second-guessing strategies. The delicate balance of narrative control had tipped into chaos. A sense of urgency replaced calm, and the team realized that each misstep had cascading consequences. The crisis wasn't just public. It was internal, emotional, and professional. One senior advisor reportedly remarked, "We've dealt with media challenges before, but nothing like this. Every move we try to make is being analyzed, mocked, or twisted. It's like watching a controlled storm become a hurricane." That hurricane was Meghan's public meltdown magnified by media coverage and social media engagement. Each attempt to redirect the narrative, interviews, carefully staged photos, and media statements, felt reactive rather than proactive, signaling to the team that control had been lost. Adding to the pressure was the realization that Meghan's desperation was visible, and visible desperation is difficult to manage. Advisors had planned for calculated charm, strategic appearances, and controlled media interactions, but the emotional intensity of Meghan's actions introduced unpredictability. A subtle expression, a mistimed comment, or an unintended gesture could, and did, become headline news. The team was forced to operate in a reactive mode, constantly anticipating the next viral moment. Communication within the team reportedly became strained. Differences in opinion, panic, and the stress of constant media scrutiny created tension. Some advisors argued for retreat and recalibration, suggesting that Meghan needed to pause and reassess. Others pushed for more aggressive media engagement, hoping that visibility could counteract negative perception. The debate was heated, and every decision carried the weight of potential failure. In essence, the advisors were trapped between attempting damage control and executing a plan that had already shown signs of unraveling. A particularly telling example occurred when a planned media appearance was delayed and rewritten at the last minute. Advisors scrambled to adjust talking points, photo angles, and messaging, hoping to counteract the public perception of desperation. Yet social media users and journalists noticed the shift. Was that confidence or panic? Became a trending question. Every action, meant to stabilize, became fodder for critique, highlighting just how uncontrollable the situation had become.